Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Future of Space. I'm your host, Daniel Fox. Our guest today is Shelli Brunswick. Shelli is the CEO and founder of SB Global and former U.S. Air Force officer and Chief Operating Officer of Space Foundation. With a rich background in space technology, policy development, leadership, and entrepreneurship, she leverages her experience to drive space exploration and innovation. She is a renowned motivational speaker. She annually delivers over 100 speeches worldwide on career success, leadership, and workforce development. Her contribution to NASA and European Space Agency future studies, along with her advocacy for women in space, have earned her numerous accolades, including the top 100 women in the future in emerging technology. Shelli, welcome to the Future Space.
Well, thank you so much. It's an honor to join you today.
Thank you. Well, I'm looking forward for this great conversation ahead of us. But before we get into some of your background, your journey, what are you working on, could you share with us 3 words that for you captures the essence of space?
Well, the 3 words, which is a hard thing to do, are opportunities, challenges, and global partnerships.
Do you think that these frontiers, it's the kind of just the basic of what these new frontiers offer, right? I mean, even if we want to bring it down to when the kids leave the family home, they're looking for new opportunities. It's going to be challenging, and then there's going to, and then we get married because corporation, that is the value of what pushing these new horizons always bring to the table.
Absolutely. I mean, when I look at the opportunities of the space industry, we have the opportunity, as you said, for inclusivity. When we think back 60 years ago to the Apollo era, we were 2 countries in a space race, primarily STEM professionals, science, technology, engineering, mathematics, government workers, and primarily male. Now, as we look at the space industry, it's more than 90 nations operating in space. We can see a diversity of career fields, more than 50 different career fields. We see the diversity of gender, men and women now. We can see men and women all over, as well as a multitude of age differences. So it is definitely inclusivity. There's opportunities for everyone. But, as I said, there are some challenges with funding. Space is expensive. That's why you have to see these international partnerships and collaborations. There's technological challenges, and then there's also, diplomatic challenges. Right now we are partners on the International Space Station with the Russians, but we do know as the future we deorbit the International Space Station, the Russians may and have chosen to partner with the Chinese. So we can see all of these 3 things of opportunities, challenges, and global partnerships taking place as we continue to figure out what is our future of space.
Do you think that where we're going, the space, that the frontier is different the previous frontiers, right? Whether it's the 1900s with ocean exploration, the age of exploration, or other great migrations or moments where these major milestones have been accomplished. Is it really different today, or is it just that the form of it is different?
Well, I think the form of it is different. I mean, we're thinking about space, and for our generation, that is very exciting, very challenging. Why are we doing that? But when we think back, like you said, crossing the oceans and traveling around the planet, Antarctica, which you're going to this year, which will be exciting, it's really no different. I mean, we look at how governments did the activities first, and then we saw, we'll say, the billionaires went next, and then it became the general masses. And we're seeing that with space as well. For the first 50 years of the space ecosystem, it was really led by the governments. The governments were doing all the launches, the governments were doing all the satellites, and it was very much a government-led ecosystem. Now, as we see the governments pulling back from those areas where commercial can step into it, now we're seeing where those commercial entities are stepping in, and we see that Blue Origin and SpaceX, but also all the satellite operators and companies like Maxar. We're seeing new entrants into the space industry. I just came out with an Earth Day article in Forbes Technology Council about orbital debris. We have a massive challenge with orbital debris, and we're seeing these commercial companies stepping in to solve that challenge. And so as we see that, then the next step will be where the general public can join and participate. And we're starting to see that with private citizens going to space with these commercial companies. So it is similar to the previous patterns we've seen, but for this generation, it's new. And so that's part of what we need to do with your podcast and building awareness, is that what we're seeing in the space industry is similar to what has happened in the past. And then how do we want to make sure that it's inclusive so that everyone can participate?
Yeah, it's easier, obviously, to point the finger at the Bezos and the Elon Musk, but the reality is that the concept of billionaires have always been part of that narrative. Right? Back in the days, if we go back to the age of exploration, ocean exploration, there were the kings and the queens, and there were the monarchy, and there were the rich people who would finance, obviously, for economic reasons. And when people say today, it's like, why the gap between the landing on the moon and the space race and finally today? And the gap is really because of the incentive, right? Before, the incentive was not about commercial, it was not about the technology, it was about the politics and the arms race with Russia. Often we say that the worst thing that happened to the space program was that actually we did get to the moon, and then after that it was like, what do you do? But then it took 50 years for the technology to catch up, and now we have the economic incentive that brings the longevity of it. When people say, well, maybe it's going to stop tomorrow. Well, that won't happen because the incentives have changed. And even, I don't know if you saw, but NASA just announced yesterday that for Mars, they have to scrap the entire endeavor managed by themselves, and now they're looking for the private sector for solution. So do you see that like pretty much everywhere now? That's the reality of the future in space.
Well, I think public-private partnerships is a great way of doing business. We really think about, we're seeing, SpaceX launching all these rockets now, but really up until 2004, the U.S. government launched all their rockets, whether it was through the military or NASA. And then there was legislation and policy that was created in 2004 that allowed private companies to become launch providers. And now over that 20-year span, you're now seeing where the government buys those services now from those launch providers, and they've gotten out of that business. That is a really good model, and it is very expensive to go to space. So it's really important for that global partnership, building those relationships. NASA is building relationships through the Artemis Accords with other nations, but it's also really important to do that public-private partnership to provide some of that seed money to help those companies get us to the next step. And we can see that Mars is a little further off, and I think Elon Musk has some plans for Mars, but more near term and more with the public-private partnership would be the replacement for the International Space Station. We see that we need to deorbit that by 2030. And what NASA has started to do is do some funding for various different commercial space stations that would eventually become a commercial space station. And then NASA and anybody else will be a tenant, just like a mall. And then it'll become a commercial entity that makes a profit. And so similar to any other entity, that is a good business model for the U.S. government to be part of, building that public-private partnership and then eventually the commercialization of it.
I think we've been kind of going around answering that question, but I always ask really the core of these thoughts that I want people to think about. Right? We're always so sure talking about the science. We talk about opportunities and challenges, and the science story and the technology story. But if we want to bring it down to the human story, right, going to space. What does that resonate for you when we talk about the human story of going to space?
Well, I think the human story resonates with inspiration. It's inspirational to think that we will be an interplanetary species. It's inspirational to think that we'll have a moon research center. It's inspirational to think we'll have a Mars research center. And I don't mean we as in a country, I mean we as humanity. It's inclusivity, and it's about the impact of what that means. It's not just the inspiration to be that interplanetary species, with inclusivity, but how will that impact and help our planet and humanity that's here on the planet? And what many people don't realize is how beneficial space technology is to our everyday lives. On average, we're communicating or using satellites 45 times a day to help us in our daily lives. We just don't know it. Like today, you and I are communicating with telecommunications. That was designed by the space program for astronauts, and now we have commercialized it to a point that most people don't even know that that was commercial technology from the space industry. My husband was a firefighter for 30 years, and because of fire retardant clothing, he was able to come home every day. Again, that fire retardant clothing came from the space industry. So I think it's really important that as we think about human spaceflight and the next generation of space leaders, that it's about being inspirational, inclusive, and what is that impact?
And not just technology, but also value-based in the way that we want to build a society, right? If we go back to migration from Europe to America, America represented this ideal of how we wanted the world to be, and America is still elevating usually as a whole, the rest of the world. So these new places always offer that opportunity to reframe how we want to move forward. But I think that there's one thing that often we tend to forget and dismiss a little bit is these new frontier, right? Some of us are really excited about going, and others feel the sense of abandonment, which we cannot dismiss, right? This is nothing different than growing up in the smaller village, and then one of the siblings decide to go to New York, and the rest of the family goes, well, so we're not good enough for you, you have to go to the big city, right? So that sense of abandonment is legitimate and needs to be addressed. So how would you address the sentiment of, well, you guys don't think that the earth is enough, you have to go beyond? So how do we address that challenge of communication?
Well, I think the first thing we have to highlight is, yes, we are going to the moon and onto Mars and beyond, but we're also wrapping that back to Earth and how space is helping to solve our challenges here on Earth. Many people don't realize how space is benefiting every one of the Sustainable Development Goals. And for your audience, if you haven't been to the United Nations Office of Outer Space Affairs website, there's a drop-down menu that highlights how space is supporting those Sustainable Development Goals, is supporting climate change and climate change solutions, is supporting helping us solve our challenges here on Earth. So it's not about we're leaving to abandon you, we're leaving to learn more to help benefit humanity. I think you talked about William Shatner and his experience of going to space and how fragile our ecosystem is. I heard Neil deGrasse Tyson once say, if the Earth was an apple, our atmosphere is like the thickness of the skin of the apple. So we are in a very fragile ecosystem. I think the more that we can learn and understand about how amazing and unique the planet Earth is, we can do that understanding through using space technology and Earth observation, and look for technology solutions that help us solve our challenges here on Earth. So hopefully we're bridging that divide between the space community and the general public that may think we're abandoning them, when in reality we really want to empower them.
It's that's the entire experience of traveling, right? And going beyond. If you grew up in a little village and you're surrounded by mountains, one day you decide to go to the summit and climb, and then you look back and then you see everything now in perspective, in context, right? It gives you a sense of appreciation of where you are. You can see the river where, like, you go fishing, but it gives you a sense of appreciation. Traveling today, we grew up in the world of conveniency and abundance, but then we go and travel around the world, and we realize that everybody's trying to do the same thing as us: put food on the table, find something valuable, and give a future to our children. But then they do it differently through different avenues. But it gives you a sense of appreciations of the things that you take for granted at home. When you start flying and you look down, it gives you a sense of perspective, appreciative of how complex things are. Now, going to space, and we've talked about earlier about the overview effect, but seeing the Earth in context with space. And you talked Shatner, who's coming with us to Antarctica, and Neil deGrasse also is coming. But Neil Shatner really embodied that experience. I mean, we can say that Shatner has been primed his entire life for that moment, right? For someone who was connected to the idea of space, but the physicality of that experience, right? Going up at his age, also, where he is, and seeing the life, right? And I don't know if you remember, but it was so powerful when Bezos is right next to him, and Bezos is trying to have him drink champagne, and is Lauren is like trying, oh, go over there. They're all excited. They're all like kind of not, they're not feeling his vibe. And Shatner is like, hold on, give me the moment, give me the space, because what I just experienced was so profound. And he came back, and his desire and his passion for Earth just came back and up through the roof. And that's what we're talking about experiencing these places.
Absolutely. I'm similar to you. I love the adventure of travel. That is why I grew up, joined the Air Force so I could see the world, and was stationed in multiple countries, Germany and Turkey. But also, I've been an adventurer ever since. I love Africa, the Serengeti, traveling, meeting new people, learning new things. So I'm excited about your adventure to Antarctica. That's on my bucket list as well. And unlike others, I don't necessarily need to go to space to know how amazing our planet Earth is. I watched this incredible show called How the Universe Works, and it explains about how unique Earth is and how it was formed, and how our moon being there helped create these titles that created our seas, and that's how life may have formed. And you don't see that around the other planets. You see how Mars had life, but because of major impacts, and its core has slowed, its rotation has slowed because it has a similar iron core as the Earth, but because it is slowed, that has reduced its atmosphere, and the solar winds are now peeling away its atmosphere. So the Earth is so unique. So yes, it's important for individuals to go to space, share their experience with us, do experiments, agriculture, healthcare, to help us better life on Earth. But it's also, you and I are both kindred spirits, and our Earth is so special, and it's important that we highlight how amazing the wildlife, the nature, the fauna that has unfolded here and developed, and communicate that whether you want to be a space traveler or you love planet Earth, we're the same people, all caring about where we come from and helping to understand and build bridges with others.
I mean, absolutely. We just experienced, and by the way, there's you're talking about the moon, and we'll put in the comment section the information. A recent podcast by Radiolab, and talking about how the moon, that we take it for granted, but the connection, and not only how we now understand, we think of how the moon came to be. Almost the way that they put it is almost like Earth actually gave birth to the moon, but all the impacts that it has, right? If the moon disappeared today, life really would not exist on Earth. It would stop. And so this yin and the yang, this connection, and also we just experienced the eclipse. And I think that when people watch the eclipse, they don't realize that there's nowhere else on the solar system that we know of where you can experience this perfect alignment of one celestial with the sun, and where everything works perfectly, right? If you're on Mars, you could have something passing in front of the moon, in front of the sun, but you will not have what we experience, here. So there's all the specialness of Earth that we have, that obviously I think that you really understand the value only by going beyond and looking back and realizing how special it is. And that's the value of traveling and experiencing. Did you always have your eyes set to the sky and space, or it was more of a natural progression of U.S. Air Force, and then these opportunities started to present themselves?
Well, that is an excellent question because when I was growing up, space was not really something I would have considered an option. When you think back 40 years ago, to be in the space industry, you really were a military, maybe test pilot, or you came up through a different way, being an engineer or scientist through NASA. So I joined the Air Force in the 80s really to see the world. I wanted to see the world and experience the world, and the military offered a wonderful way to do that. And I did my first 12 years in the Air Force as an enlisted airman. So that means I enlisted in the U.S. Air Force right out of high school, became a personnel specialist at human resources, so HR. Got to live in Europe and loved it. And at night I went to school and completed my degrees, both my bachelor's and master's, in business administration. So I'm not that STEM professional. But when I applied to become an officer, the Air Force made me a space procurement acquisition specialist. So that started my space career. But when you think about it, so I was not a traditional, we'll say, space professional because I don't have a STEM background. I have a business background, which is very important in today's world with all the commercialization now. But I was somewhat traditional because I was still in the military. And so that afforded me a great opportunity. But I will share with you and your audience, when the Air Force said, we want you to be a military procurement officer for the space industry, I said, I don't want that. I don't know what that is. I don't know any of my friends who know what that is. I want to be this personnel officer, human resources. That's what I know. That's what I am comfortable with. But fortunately in the military, they don't really give you an option. And so you salute smartly and you say, yes, sir. And then I became a space professional. And so I'm so grateful for that because that has started my 25-year career in the space industry. And it's been an amazing career with the military first, and then with Space Foundation, learning about civil, international, commercial, academia, and now launching my own company as an entrepreneur, highlighting how valuable space is to the entire economy of the globe, not just a space economy, astronauts and launch vehicles, but all economies, agriculture, the Internet of Things, finance, education, healthcare, and more.
Now, you just mentioned a moment in your life where something that you didn't think of doing or didn't want to do, and then you do it, and then it opens up an entire new future. Do you think that our society has become a bit disconnected by discomfort or the challenges ahead? Because I think we're so used of having things working for us that we've forgotten how resilient and resourceful we are, like in those moments, and how a lot of the doom and gloom today stems from the fact that we struggle by seeing the after, right? It's like someone who's been in a relationship in marriage for decades, right? Several, or you've been at a job at a corporate for 10, 20, 30 years, and you see your identity tied only to that environment, and you have difficulty seeing your life outside of that, right? But once the inevitable happens, whether the relationship breaks or you change career, 6 months, a year later, you realize how actually you're in a better place, and you look back and you wonder why it took you so long to get out of there. So why did you worry so much? Do you think that it's our society right now struggles with this capacity to see beyond?
I'm not sure if it's a societal issue or really we as human beings sometimes fear the unknown. And I'm working on a book called What Space Got to Do with It? Lessons I've Learned Along the Way. And one of those lessons is, don't fear the unknown. I was afraid when I became an officer to start this space acquisition thing. I didn't know what it was. I didn't want to do it. But it became the best thing that ever happened to me. So many times we fear that unknown. We fear that next step, that door opening. And we can see that a lot in today with quantum technology, artificial intelligence. We really need to be lifelong learners. Jobs are changing. Things are changing. And that can create fear and discomfort. But what I kind of share with your audience is lean into that. Because when you leave your comfort zone, that's when you enter the growth zone.
It's and this is for me the reason why I'm not I'm a realist, right? I understand the challenges and the things that needs to be addressed and dealt with. But at the same time, I have I trust our species in figuring things out as we move forward. Life is messy, right? The idea that life is perfect, or even the nature is perfect. Nature is far from being perfect. Nature is just it's a melt pot of tension, disruption, creation. It only wants one thing. It wants to adapt and evolve and move forward so they can be diverse. And if one thing doesn't work, then it starts on something else. But the human species today, we're 8 billion on the planet, and if we look into our past through all these ups and downs, here we are in a world that is definitely much better than anything that is behind us. And we do rise in the worst of times. I think that when things go too well, we have a tendency to become arrogant and taking things for granted. But when these possessions that we value so much starts to be threatened, then we start to put our thinking at hats and look at how can we figure things out. And that's why I'm excited about where we are today and where we're going, is because now we have an incentive to get out of our comfort zone and get up. Is that something that, I mean, I assume from your work, this is something that also that you promote in your talks?
Absolutely. I think the world we live in is amazing. When we think about, limitless electricity and food and everything, but we're also seeing where there are the sustainable development goals, where we do have people that are experiencing hunger and poverty and educational equality. And so by raising that awareness, we can create solutions, we can innovate, we can get in that growth zone to create new opportunities for everyone. And space is a great equalizer because, farmers anywhere, farmers in America, farmers in Africa, farmers in South America, can all use Earth observation and precision agriculture to increase their crop yields. We can use many of the space technologies equally. And that's what's really important about the great work the United Nations Office of Outer Space Affairs does, the UN General Assembly, and Science Summit that's taking place in September 2024 in New York, where we highlight how space can create more equality and access around the planet, equalizing the use of that technology.
Now, how challenging you're talking about the United Nations, we have the Artemis Accord, but if we look at the previous Space Accord, where even China had signed on, now the Artemis Accord, there's, I think, 30 something, like the momentum for signaties on the Accord is really different right now that there's a opening of access to space. There's a lot more divide. I mean, there's a divide in it that also is more challenging. As we open up space, what's the strategy, or how challenging, or how do we move forward, making sure that there's as many people coming to the table, but at the same time understanding that not everyone want to come to that table, they want to create their own one.
So that is true. We are looking at a variety of space systems. So what I am going to say is for the Sustainable Development Goals, all the UN members in 2015 agreed to those Sustainable Development Goals. In the space industry, the last time everyone agreed to a treaty was more than 50 years ago. And as we can tell today, there's a lot of polarization right now, geopolitics. So the likelihood of having another treaty that relates to space, how we'll partner and collaborate on the moon or Mars or share resources or anything, is very troubling. I'm not sure we'll get there. I do believe the United Nations Office of Outer Space Affairs has many diplomatic meetings to talk about space laws and norms. But that's really where you said the Artemis Accord is coming into play. It's about bringing people to the table. It's not a formal treaty. It's not binding, but it's an opportunity for guidelines. How will we work together? How can we be inclusive? How can we partner in areas? How will everyone benefit from it? So I think that's a great model for how we can work together and go into space, and creating those norms of behavior is through the Artemis Accord, and also working with the United Nations Office of Outer Space Affairs on many of their diplomatic activities.
And I think that that's one of the reasons why we need to go to these places, right? Because if we don't, then someone else will go and shape it in a way that not necessarily connects to how, our vision. This is one of also the similar argument about going to Antarctica, right? Now we have the technology and the opportunities for a lot of people to go and experience Antarctica. It's a massive continent, right? It's big, and you cannot just say no one can touch it because because it's so pristine and pretty. But the people who actually say that went to Antarctica, experienced it, and now they come back and they tell the world, not to do it. So the power of that experience need to be available, but also going so that we can understand how can we protect and how can we manage in a way that opens up these experiences, but at the same time create the value and protection. And I think that a lot of people forget how in the U.S., right, we take our national parks for granted, but national parks did not exist when Roosevelt and the others and Grant started the national park. Now we have thousands of national parks in the world, and the U.S. is extremely protective of their access to the wilderness. But that is only because we've created those areas where they can go and experience it. And I think it's the same thing about Antarctica or about these new frontiers that we go. We need to go so that we can experience it and understand how to protect them.
Absolutely. I think it's really important, like you said, we can't protect or mitigate what we don't understand. And so, again, that's a lot of why we have all these amazing satellites in orbit that are helping us understand what's happening with our planet, the weather systems that are happening, drought, floods, etc. But it's similar, Antarctica is amazing. And again, we're all excited to go there. I am too, to see the pristineness. Leave it the way we found it. I think that's important to highlight. It's just like hiking. Track in with what you have, track out with it. Don't leave it there. Animals don't litter, neither should humans. So I think we need to highlight the importance of Antarctica, but it's similar to the other ecosystems, like you said. In the U.S., our national parks are somewhat supported by the U.S. government, but in many parks in Africa, the Serengeti, the Masai Mara, South Africa, and so on, they need that tourism to help sustain the park, to help employ people, to protect the animals and the ecosystem. So it's really important to understand that to protect parks around the world and create these habitats for animals and wildlife and flora for us to experience, it's also important that we do go there to contribute in an economic manner. And that's similar to space. We talked about, the billionaires, going to space. And yes, but we need them, right? Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, they are creating the infrastructure of the future of space. They're creating the future vehicles that will get us there. Others are creating the habitats. Others are going to create the energy systems that will help us survive in space. Others are creating agricultural ways of growing food in space. So it's really important that we incorporate that commercial side of things, because incorporating the commercial side ensures that we can keep it viable for the future, similar to how we need to maintain all the amazing parks in Africa.
And there's a complexity in that equation. I think that often we forget about how complicated that entire ecosystem works, right? We're talking about the national parks and nature. Well, the reality in the U.S. is that 60% of the funds that go into the national parks come from the hunting community. It's not the people who go and enjoy the outdoors, just for the hike. In fact, they want the access for free, but the hunters will come and subsidize the protection. In Africa, hunting is actually a big part of the. They have to figure out how to manage because the government is not there to support them. But even like in our everyday life, like we want cheap access to a lot of things, but then we don't want child labor. We don't want the dependence on fossil fuels, but then we don't want the windmills in our backyard. So the idea of change is always super attractive for people because it kind of gives them a good vision of the future. But the consequences of change is always hard. So how do we navigate? And I think that often we're quick to blame our politicians, but ultimately the politicians are an extension of us, right? We're the ones voting for them. We're the ones deciding where we put our money. So I think that by taking ownership of the situation so that we can figure out, we can create the conversation and how we move forward, and also seeing that every obstacle is an, like you were saying earlier, is an opportunity for growth, right? Even the current elections that are coming or what happened in the past, these elements actually have created opportunities for a lot of people. After Trump, we saw an uprise of women involvement in politics, which I don't think would have happened had it not been for these, for these events. So you grew up in a journey of constantly finding these opportunities for growth, and this is what you do in your public speaking, right? You share that wisdom.
Absolutely. I think it's important to share the insights we have and how they can relate to our experiences, but what we might be experiencing today. And I will say that in the book I'm writing about lessons learned, I've interviewed 150 global leaders. So it's not just the lessons learned from Shelli Brunswick, which, yes, they are, but I've also vetted these with 150 global thought leaders that have also said, yes, these are universal truths. Take advantage of every opportunity. Don't fear the unknown. Get out from behind your desk. And so I love what you've said about that. And the other thing that's really important is we do vote here in the United States and many countries around the world. And it's really important. The number one thing we can do is build awareness of opportunities. That's why your podcast is so amazing. And I do 100 speaking events a year, is because we're building awareness of how the space ecosystem is helping us here on Earth. We're building awareness of the challenges that are here on Earth. You talked about child labor law and all of that. One of the things you can see on CNN, they've had some specials about the high cost of cheap clothes. How they're coming from other countries. They're the price is very cheap, but ultimately they're ending up in landfills or in Africa, polluting the planet and ending up in the oceans. And so it's really important that one of the things we do together is to create the awareness of what is happening and then how we as individuals can make a change. I have another amazing friend, Lumbi Malambo. She's the water lady. You can follow her on LinkedIn. She also does a lot of things with the UN related to water. Now, when Lumbi was growing up in Africa, she would have to walk twice a day to retrieve the water for her family, for their cooking and their livestock. And girls and women in Africa today are still having to walk 4 to 10 miles one way to retrieve water. And now it's becoming even more challenging because some of the rivers have dried up and it's dangerous. There can be bandits that can attack them. And then the water can be contaminated as well. So what Lumbi is doing through her nonprofit is drilling wells within a 30-minute walk of villages so women and girls can walk to safe, clean drinking water within 30 minutes, walk home, and then they can go get jobs and go to school. So again, it's all about how are we building awareness, and then how can each of us in our own way make a difference. So Lumbi has started a project called 100 Voices of Our Planet, and it's sanctioned by the UN, how individuals can be making a difference to help our planet. And I know, Daniel, you'll be very interested in that as well.
Do you think that sometimes and for me personally, I've been at odds often with some of the sectors who look into the past as if there was a magical place to go back to, right? They see where we are today and they're like, we have to stop growth, we have to stop everything because sometimes someplace, right? Some magical moment in the past, everything worked perfectly. And I think that for the vast majority of people that are engaged into securing tomorrow, right? Putting food on the table, giving a future to their children, paying the bills, going into the past is not like it's so counterintuitive. And there's slowly and gradually, I think that now there are other people that are saying it's not about going to the past. And it's not about also subtracting what people now take for granted. Like no one wants to move into a future where you're gonna have to say all the benefits that you have right now, you're gonna have to voluntarily, give them away. but what we have to look into is how can we do more but better? How can we move forward in a better way so that we can achieve, sustainability and longevity, as opposed to constantly pointing the finger in a place where even life doesn't want to go, right? Life doesn't ungrow itself. It grows and it wants to go to new places and it wants to figure out how to do it and continue to do it. So is that like something that you teach also in your engagements?
Well, I think what's funny is I'd like to talk to all those people who want to go back to the past, and I want to say the first thing I want you to give up is your smartphone. I don't see anybody wanting to do that. So I agree with you. I mean, what we don't understand when we look at today and we think back ideally to the past is, oh, how ideal it was. But for anyone who studies history, and I'm not a history major, I have a business degree, but I do enjoy reading and listening to Roman history and Greek history, because what we'll see is many of the things we experience today with politics and everything are similar throughout history. So we as humanity are the same, it's just different. And I think what we have to do is really look at, I'm going to call it, instead of growing or changing, it's how do we have smart growth? So we need to raise awareness of some of the things that we have done that are not good. We've polluted our planet. We have climate change. We know we've polluted, we've got orbital debris and space junk out there. And what we need to say is, okay, how do I move forward in a manner that is sustainable, that solves those and makes the future better? And then that's how we move forward together, creating solutions together. And that's why the first step is building that awareness and bringing people to the table and listening.
Because it's not, ultimately it's not for the benefit of the earth. It's for our own benefit, for our own future, right? Independently, if we make mistakes, the scale of the earth, whether it's an asteroid or it's a volcano, they will find a way to move to start something new. But this idea of having a future that is more sustainable, where we understand the connection with everything and the impact of our actions, is ultimately for our children, for ourselves. And the decisions, if we're quick at judging the past the way that often we do, then we also have to accept that we will be judged by the future in the same manner. Because the vast majority, I mean, that's another debate, but we all wake up in the morning trying to do the right thing within the means and the technology and the knowledge that we have. And sometimes the solutions that work today don't work tomorrow because the circumstances have changed. So we have to give ourselves, I think, a little break of blaming, right? The idea of trying to find someone to blame does not lead to, I think, any constructive conversation. And we have to understand the complexities so that we can bring up everyone to the table and move forward, as opposed to having this negativity into blaming and pointing into the past.
Absolutely. I don't think blaming helps anybody, and trying to make people feel guilty for decisions they may have made in the past doesn't help either. It doesn't bring them to the table to create the solutions we need for the future. So I totally agree with you that it's about how do we come together and solve things together. I've heard, we're looking at a lot of the oil and gas companies that are doing a lot of things for decarbonizing the atmosphere. And, some people are like, well, the oil and gas industry, didn't they cause this problem? Well, we all cause this problem. We all want energy. We all want cars. We all want jobs. And, energy is what makes that economic engine move forward. So we have to bring everyone to the table to think about the solutions for how we improve things, and do away with the guilt and the blame and the finger pointing, and find ways to work together. I had a colleague who once said, when you point your finger at someone else, there are 3 fingers pointing back at you.
There's it's the basic of communication 101, even in a relationship. The minute that you accuse the other person, even if they agree with you, they're gonna accuse you back, because now it's just, that's the dynamic, right? So we all, in therapy, they always say, well, I feel that something, so it's more about me, as opposed to say that the other person did something with the hope of hurting me, because from the other perspective, they're like, that's not what I want to do, because communication in life is so complex. Now, Shelli, you've interviewed a lot of people. You've spoken, around the world. You have books coming, and really the ethos of your work is really about inspiring people to find the opportunity to become better. So throughout all the interviewing and finding the wisdom in others, from your perspective, what would be 3 words, Shelli's 3 words of wisdom? I don't want to take away from your book that is coming, but Shelli's 3 words of wisdom.
Well, my third book is going to be on global transformational leadership, being a GTL. And the first thing a global transformational leader needs to be is inspirational. They need to inspire. And so that's my first word of wisdom. We all need to be inspirational. We need to inspire others. The second word, as I say, is innovate. And that's not just in technology. Yes, we need to innovate in technology, but we need to innovate in diplomacy. We need to innovate in how we communicate with each other. We need to innovate in our thought processes. So that second word is innovate. And then that third word is integrate. We need to integrate everyone together. We need to create those global partnerships and find that way to move forward as humanity. So inspire, innovate, and integrate.
You feel that the desire to innovate cannot be dissociated without failure, because the path to innovation is exactly the same path to a mistake. It's just that the outcome is different. So do we need at the same time to train people and giving them the skills to navigate these failures so that they can get to that place of innovation?
Absolutely. That is one of my lessons learned is don't fear failure. Try anyways. Think about SpaceX. Think about how many times, yes, we see SpaceX now and they're amazing and they're going to the moon and to Mars, but look at how many times they had failures. They called them anomalies in space, but how many rockets blew up? But what they did is, Elon Musk and Gwen Shotwell said, as long as we learn something from it, it's not a failure. And sometimes it's faster to fail and learn than it is to try to figure everything out. So don't think of it as failure. Think of it as learning. You know what failure? Just go F.A.I.L. First attempt in learning.
Wonderful. I love it. Shelli, it's the best way to come to a conclusion to our conversation. I will write that down, and obviously when we publish the interview, I'll put that into the description. But I think it's a first attempt in learning. It's I love these little moments of inspiration. So, Shelli, it's been a pleasure having you on the Future Space.
It's been my pleasure, and until next time, I look forward to seeing you around the galaxy.
Will do. Thank you, Shelli.